This is Gold Striker at California's Great America, and this is the newest wooden roller coaster to open in California. So is this California's best wooden coaster? Yeah. Let's find out. But first, welcome to 808 Coaster Life. If you're new to this channel and you love roller coasters and other theme park related stuff, please consider subscribing. Because of California's climate and other factors, there aren't too many wooden coasters in the state. This is to this day the newest wooden roller coaster in the state, but it is also said to be one of the best wooden coasters in the state and one of the best rides ever made by Great Coasters International or GCI. So after riding Ghost Rider, which is to this day still one of my favorite wooden coasters, I was very interested to ride Gold Striker, especially since unlike Ghost Rider, this ride's future along with its park is very uncertain, and I'd figure a wooden coaster would be much harder to relocate than a steel coaster. So let's see what an experience on Gold Striker's like so that you can decide whether or not this should be on your radar. So as you would imagine, this ride looks great at the front of the park. GCIs have always been pretty aesthetic looking wooden coasters, and I like how the first drop and turn wrap around the park's observation tower. Apparently this ride can get a long line, but it wasn't too long when I was there. We also had fast lane, so it was a little hard to tell. The queue line has basically no theming. I mean, this was Cedar Fair before they started adding a lot of theming to their rides, so it's pretty bare. This ride did have assigned seating when I was there, which we experienced throughout most of Northern California. However, they like to load the train starting from the front, so if you request a row towards the back, you're more likely to get that row than a front row ride. That being said, 2 of our 5 rides were in the front row just out of luck. If you want the most intense ride on Gold Striker, I would recommend the back row, but the ride is also great in the front row and it's a bit smoother too. So if you have the time, definitely try out both rows. Personally for me, I like the back row a little more. The station has shade, which, considering this park, is pretty impressive actually. And don't fret about your loose articles because there are free bins in the station. This ride of course uses GCI's classic Millennium Flyer trains, particularly the slightly older design, which means it has great cushioning. I've always liked Millennium Flyer trains for their maneuverability and comfort. The lap bars on these trains are pretty interesting. They kind of fall down on you without much friction, so there is a chance it could come down on you during the ride. That being said, I never had any of those issues on any of the GCIs and CCI I've experienced. If this really is an issue for you, you can always have one hand on the lap bar as the ride goes. This ride has a height of 108.2 feet with a top speed of 53.7 miles per hour. It has a total track length of 3,197 feet, which is traversed in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You start off the ride by going through a little pre-lift section, which involves a couple unbanked turns before the lift hill. Don't sleep on them. These turns can actually provide some decent laterals. You then go up your lift hill, which provides a nice view of the park to your right. After being completely enclosed by a tunnel, you then go down the first drop. If you wondered why this ride has a lot of tunnels and walls, that's because shortly after this coaster started testing, the park got noise complaints from the nearby offices. People just couldn't handle how awesome this ride is. Just kidding, it would probably be pretty distracting. Because of the tunnel, the drop may feel steeper than it actually is because you're kind of forced to look down. Many GCIs feature curved drops, but this one actually starts off as a straight drop and then turns into a curved drop. So in the back row, you get pretty good airtime on this drop. You then get a bit of laterals as you transition into the ride's first turn, which was very intense. You then gain even more speed as you glide past the queue line while experiencing some laterals. You then go into your first speed hill, which I would say has the strongest moment of airtime on this ride. In every row, you're suddenly lifted out of your seat, and while I would say it's more flowjector, it's pretty sustained. This first section was my favorite part of the ride because of how fast you're going and how intense it was. You then get a little air as you transition into a banked turn to the right. This showcases one thing I like about GCI coasters. This coaster has very much a twister layout, meaning it's in a relatively small footprint and likes to weave around itself. It's hard to put airtime hills in this kind of layout, so GCI incorporates airtime into its turns, making them more exciting. You then drop to the left while passing through a tunnel before going into a banked speed hill. Yep, you heard that right. GCI made sideways airtime before it was cool. This hill felt stronger in the front row, but it's floater airtime overall. You then pull lots of positive G's and a little bit of laterals as you turn up to the left. You then drop again before going into a twisted airtime hill, which had a nice combination of laterals and airtime in all rows. I will warn, some reviews say this is the roughest part of the ride. I'll say it's slightly rougher than the rest of the ride. Following that is a slightly off-axis hill. I would say while this airtime is definitely sustained, it has the weakest airtime on the ride. You get a little pop of air before swooping down into another bank turnaround. This one in particular was quite forceful with a little bit of laterals. You then pull a lot of laterals as you turn a little to the right before getting a nice pop of flow ejector airtime on this little drop. You then go into this double up. Now this is the only part of the layout that left me a little disappointed. From the POVs, it looked like this section throws you around like a ragdoll and gives ejector airtime in the process, but on ride in all rows, it felt more civilized. The airtime strength was alright here, but it was still impressive how they squeezed 2 speed humps in a short amount of track. They're really making the most of this ride's kinetic energy. You turn to the left before doing one more drop down, which had decent airtime in the back. You then pop up into one last turn, which had a decent bit of laterals. You then go into the brakes, ending your ride on Gold Striker. One quirk about GCIs is you actually pass through the maintenance shed before going back into the station. So going into Gold Striker, I've ridden 3 GCIs previously, and overall this ride met my expectations. This layout screams classic GCI, which has certain perks. First of all, great pacing. This ride never felt like it let up in speed. Do note that GCIs tend to not have the absolute strongest airtime in the world. This ride isn't an exception. The airtime on this ride is very sudden, but the strength is more floater or flowjector. I don't find this a bad thing since that makes GCIs more unique. This ride has a great ride duration, did not feel short whatsoever, and has a great mix of positives, weak ejector, and laterals. I will say, unlike the other 3 GCIs I've ridden, this ride is a bit more intense. Mainly, the positives felt much more amplified on this ride. Now, other reviews have said that this ride has gotten rough over the years, even though it did get partially retracked in 2022. I will say, this ride is definitely shaky, but I didn't mind it too much. It was about as shaky as most wooden coasters I've ridden. It really depends on how much roughness you can tolerate, but if you really want the smoothest ride possible, ride it in the front row, which delivers 90% as good of a ride. This is one of those rides where most people will look past the roughness because of other attributes the ride has. That's certainly the case for me. If the park decides this ride still has some life in it, I would suggest they should at least partially retrack it with IPE wood, like on Ghost Rider and Mystic Timbers if this hasn't happened already. This wood is more expensive, but is stronger and more long-lasting. And if this ride gets even luckier, some Gravity Group pre-cut track would definitely help this ride. Overall, the pros are the intensity, the ride duration, the trains, and the pacing. The cons are the roughness and the airtime strength. This ride gets an overall score of 4.3 out of 5 stars. This is definitely the best GCI I've ever been on. I do believe this is the best wooden coaster in Northern California, although not by a long shot because Giant Dipper is still a very good ride. I think this is the second best wooden coaster in California and the second best coaster in this park. You can probably guess which coasters I put over this. But overall, it's a great wooden coaster and you definitely should get on it if you get the chance. Especially since California's Great America is set to close within the next 10 years and wooden coasters are typically pretty difficult to relocate. While the future is still uncertain, it doesn't seem like they would close it early though. Ideally, if this coaster does end up closing with the park, I would love to see another park make a clone of this coaster. But if you want to know what my visit to California's Great America was like, check out the card up there. Have you ridden Gold Striker or any good GCI? If so, let me know down in the comments. Here's some other videos you should watch. And if you enjoyed this one, consider leaving a like and maybe even subscribe. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.